So my best friend in the entire world is a convicted felon and a former meth addict. And he gave me permission to share some of his story today. And in the worst moments of my friend's life, he appeared to have it all together. He had a master in accountancy from the University of Missouri. He worked for one of the big four accounting firms. He was in his mid to late 20s, making six figures a year, but he also had a little dirty secret. He really struggled with addiction. And he struggled so much that eventually he lost his job. And he struggled so much that he maxed out all of his credit cards on bar tabs. And he struggled so much that he couldn't pay rent and he was evicted twice. And he struggled so much that he began to deal drugs, really traffic drugs. We're talking that amount of drugs, just to make enough money to survive. And in 2015, my friend was arrested, convicted of felony drug trafficking, and sentenced to prison. And when he had served his time, his personal finances were in ruin. He had tens of thousands of dollars of credit card debt. None of that goes away when you go to prison. His car was in foreclosure, and all of his student loans had multiplied with late fees because he couldn't pay them while he was in prison. And so in 2018, due to an addiction and a series of poor decisions, when he was released from prison, he declared bankruptcy. And it was the only way forward for him. It was the only way for him to salvage his personal financial situation because bankruptcy relinquished and eliminated all of his debt, and it was the second chance that he needed to be able to flourish. And so my friend's story reminds me of the countercultural economic laws that we see laid out there in Deuteronomy 15. And before we dive into any specifics, I want to talk a little bit about the book of Deuteronomy. It's a book that most people don't read because when you start reading the Bible, you stop in Numbers and then you give up, right? So Deuteronomy, and this is going to be on the screen, Deuteronomy comes from a Greek word which means second law, or the reiteration, the retelling of the law. And as such, it's the second time that God gives God's law to God's people. The first telling of the law happens on Mount Sinai. Moses gets the 10 Commandments, comes down the mountain, and tells God's people God's laws. But this is the second time because what happened is the people got the laws and they were in the wilderness and they grumbled and they said, God's not going to take care of us and blah, blah, blah. And God said, okay, well, I guess you don't have to go to the promised land then. And you're going to be wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. But even as they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, God continued to provide them with what they needed to support their bodily life. They just were never going to be able to go to that land of milk and honey. Only their children would get to experience that promised land. And so Deuteronomy exists as a way to have a second chance for the children of the original Israelites, a new generation, a second chance for them to hear God's law and to follow God's law. In Deuteronomy's retelling of the law, it doesn't just talk about murder and adultery. It also details God's plan for God's economy. And in Deuteronomy 15, we see that God places a very special emphasis on the needs of the poor, attempting to prevent anyone from ever experiencing permanent financial distress. God commands that all debt, all of it, be canceled every seventh year. God says creditors will forgive the loans of their fellow Israelites. They won't demand repayment from their neighbors or their relatives because it's the year of the Lord's debt cancellation. And when Deuteronomy is written, the economy of Israel is in transition. In the past, land ownership was communal. You owned it together, but now people could buy land for themselves. And they were able to borrow money or the currency at the time to acquire new land. And so obviously what happens when you can borrow money is you can make a really good investment and you can become really rich. And then economic inequality happens. And in the same way, if you make a poor financial decision, you could borrow money, the investment doesn't work out, and then you are left with nothing. And so Deuteronomy is a conscience-based law code which forgave people of their debts and offered them a second chance at prosperity economically. Verses 7 and 8 say this. It says, now if there are some poor persons among you, say one of your fellow Israelites, don't be hard-hearted and tight-fisted. To the contrary, open your hands wide to them. Another translation says, give liberally and ungrudgingly when you do so. So in other words, we're supposed to give generously and not really expect to be repaid. We're supposed to give out of our abundance. Our cup is running over, and so we give out of that. And give because you have enough. Give because if one day you experience financial distress, you can be confident that someone else is going to be there to say, I have you. You can lean on me. So Deuteronomy tells us, don't be hard-hearted, don't be tight-fisted, open that hand wide. And I think the next core idea is this, that in God's sacred economy, we are responsible for each other. Okay, in God's sacred economy, we are responsible for each other. We are responsible for the uplift of our neighbor. And so just as Deuteronomy functions as this sort of second law, I think the collective has the opportunity to exist as a second chance church. We have the opportunity to reframe the work of the church as reframing towards collective liberation. And we, like this second generation of Israelites, have a chance to do church a little differently, a chance to better follow God's vision for economic justice. And this is how we seek to do this here. There are two things we do already and one thing we're going to do today. First is that we practice generosity through our abundance fund. So that means anytime we get an offering, we take 10% and we put it into a fund that goes towards a nonprofit doing good work. We've donated to the Trans Housing Project. We've donated to refugee resettlement, immigrants who need legal counsel. We've donated to a lot of great nonprofits. But we also give emergency assistance, too, to people who call and need emergency rent or a power bill or transportation to work. We give 10% right off the top to people in need. We also embody this work because we designate a lot of our funds to feeding our neighbors. This church, as small as it is, feeds around 2,500 people every single year because we believe that every person deserves access to high-quality, nutritious meals. And today we're going to do something, a little social experiment, something a little different. We're going to embody the work of Deuteronomy 15, the work of Jubilee. You see, Jubilee, we're going to call this our Day of Jubilee. And Jubilee is a biblical event. Jubilee's purpose is to prevent generational poverty and economic inequality by liberating individuals and families from permanent financial distress. And so today we're going to do this. This is what our Day of Jubilee is going to look like. Today, if you're in a relatively good financial situation, if you have enough money to pay the bills and you have a little bit left over, I'm going to invite you to give $100 to our Day of Jubilee fund. And your $100 is going to go directly to someone at the collective who needs money right now. And that $100 has the potential to relieve someone sitting in these pews right now their financial distress. You have the opportunity to open your hand and participate in God's vision for economic justice right here and right now. And on the flip side of that, if you're someone who really needs $100, we're going to give it to you. No questions asked. I've worked with donors. We got enough. If you need $100, we're going to give it to you, no questions asked. Maybe you lost a job, maybe you had an unexpected medical bill, maybe you have excessive credit card debt, whatever it might be, we don't really care, it doesn't matter the reason, we're going to give you $100. In a few minutes, I'm going to invite you too, because it's hard to receive sometimes generosity. It's like, well, I feel ashamed that I have to accept help, whatever. I'm going to invite you to open your heart to that gift of generosity. And at the end of this sermon, I'm going to explain how we're going to do this and how this is going to work. But I hope that this sort of giving, this way of giving, this reframing of what it means to be in community with one another shows the way that we think about money. We raise money not so that I can live in a $1 million home or that Hillary can drive a BMW. We're not giving money to center the institution. Okay, we raise money because we believe we're called to do church differently. We believe God's inviting us to greater things, to be a church which preaches freedom and liberation in word and in deed. But we can't really do it without your support. And so I got to share some really fun financial realities with you. Last year, I said this the last 3 weeks, and I won't say it again for a while, we raised $112,000. It was really great. An incredible amount of money for a faith community where 70% of the worship community is under 40. However, 50% of that $112,000, okay, 50%, more than $50,000, came from one family. And 70% came from 4 families. And so that's not a sustainable way to build a church. Right? The reality is that now if I make one family mad, if you make one family mad, the family who gave more than $50,000, the collective would be in a dire financial situation. In addition, the collective has been blessed by a lot of grants. I am a voracious grant writer. Okay, and in 2025, we were awarded more than $55,000 of one-time grant funding. And this grant funding pays for all of our hunger initiatives, it pays for worship staff, it pays for all of our young adult programming, it pays for all of our LGBTQ outreach events like National Coming Out Day and our vigil for Trans Day of Remembrance. All of that is grant funded. And these are transformative events, some events that some of you came for the very first time. And they're events that help us illustrate that we do church differently. Now, unfortunately, with grants, we only get to apply a lot of times once. And after that, there are not always other opportunities for us to do so. And so we need more people to invest in this community. We need active people who have never given money before to help co-create this church with us. So if this church is important to you and if you've experienced connection and belonging here, the best thing you can do to help us is set up automatic recurring gifts through the QR code during the offering. Recurring gifts help us to plan for our financial future. They ensure that we can be sustainable for many years to come. And you can make a gift as little as like $20 to $25 a month. That's wonderful. We love that. Every little bit helps. And my second ask today is at the end of the sermon, I'm going to invite you to participate in this day of Jubilee. I'm going to invite you to open your hand and to give to someone in these pews who needs it. And this isn't going to be like a wider ask. We're not advertising on social media. This is for people at the collective. And I want to end by going back to my best friend. After he was released from jail and he declared bankruptcy, he found a job, and he was given that second chance at financial freedom. He worked the 12 steps. He's been sober for 7 years he's been sober for 7 years, and in 2021, 3 years after declaring bankruptcy, he'd accumulated enough money, built back his credit to buy his first home. And today he's a pastor of United Methodist Church, and in 2025, he founded a spiritual community for people in the recovery space. He's a wounded healer who's working with people who have the similar experiences with him to help them find peace, to help them find love, to help them find hope. But I think more than that, my friend's story reveals that God's economy is an economy of second chances. God does not desire your permanent financial ruin. And when God blesses you, God does not bless you solely for your own personal enrichment. God blesses you so that you can bless other people. God blesses you so that you can be part of equipping and empowering others like my friend, so that he and all people can flourish financially and flourish spiritually. God's response to financial hardship, as I said here, God's response to decay is always renewal. That's why this Deuteronomy code exists. Decay is not your destiny, and I hope that the collective can be part of this countercultural renewal. And that's why I hope you'll set up a recurring donation. That's why I hope you'll give to our day of Jubilee. Because God's called us towards greater things, and that includes a better vision for giving. Not giving which enriches the pastor or centers the institution, but giving which centers transformation, which centers the real needs of people in our community. Because God's economy is an economy of second chances. Financially, spiritually, morally, God is all about giving people multiple second chances. So I'll close today with the next slide. So this is how we're going to do this. I've seen this done before at a church, and what happened is so many people gave to the Jubilee Fund that everybody who needed money got double of what the church guaranteed them. And I hope we can do that too. But if you can give to our Day of Jubilee Fund, I hope you fill out that QR code. You'll see a giving form, and then you'll go to Fund, and you'll click Day of Jubilee, and you can give $100 or more to people who might need it at the collective. And if you are somebody who needs a gift right now, if you're someone who is experiencing heavy financial hardships, then I encourage you to let go of any shame you feel right now and to fill out the Google form to receive a gift. And what will happen is that, because I don't want to deal with Venmo and Cash App and Zelle and all these different things, what will happen is you'll put your mailing address in, and the church will mail you a $100 bill. And my hope is that we get so many people to be generous today that we can give even more than that to the people in our community who need it, because I believe that's what we are called to do as Christians.